Hi, welcome to this new video. If this is the first time visiting my channel, my name is Pierre Schiller and I am a Blender Foundation certified trainer, and my job is to make sure that you integrate Blender into your current workflow pipeline for 3D production or animation. In this episode, we'll talk about how to create a procedural shader using, in this example, the stylized eyes that I have right here. And it's got this group shader right here, which is going to be part of the anime eyes shaders that I will be releasing for free. And if you select it and press tab, you're going to enter it, or you can also exit it by pushing this arrow, and then you're back into the top level of the material construction. You can also press tab while selecting it to go into, and then press Ctrl tab to totally exit all of the levels, all of the groups. So the idea here is that you have a procedural impact that you can change by masking and doing different math operations, so that the eyes will look totally shattered from the center to the outer areas. And for that, you have different impact sizes. You have different blending modes, as you can see right here. If I scale this, you can totally see that the effect cost is different. So you have a size for that. You have the impact mask as well, so you can animate this. If it's cracking, if it's breaking, you can go and do this on your own, and I want to show you how to do that. But first of all, we need to walk through the basics. So I was researching, as you already know, different styles for the eyes that I was creating, the eyes material I was creating. So I collected this as very good samples. Of course, you already know that I am a huge fan of anime. So this is from Akame ga Kill, where the character S-Death creates this giant shader, this giant icebergs. And this was created on Substance Designer, which it looked a lot of the anime style, the realism of the anime style. And I also developed other shaders inspired on different images that I was researching. So we have our group, we have our parameters, and let's start from the beginning. So I was researching how to create specifically better cracks, because that's something that involves a lot of nodes, and I seriously recommend you to check out this video. I will leave the video linked below. So this video is very important. Please check it out, because he goes through the process of developing this, and this is exactly what you can accomplish here in Blender. There's nothing there that we cannot do, because everything he does for the cracks, we can create it. So I want to show you, not this video. I can do it, certainly, but that's not my intent. My intent is to give you the basis, give you the build blocks, so you can go ahead and try it out after you check it out. So as you can see right here, Substance Designer starts with a very basic shape for a procedural, what we call mixing. Okay, so the idea there is to have straight black and white values. If you integrate grayscale values, it will look a lot nicer. But in our case, since we are going for a stylized look, we only could have gray in a certain area. But most of the time, we will be working with black and white. So let me show you what I mean when I say they start mixing this with procedural methods. So Mr. Schiller, I do not understand how nodes work. That's basically because I have never touched Blender's nodes. I mean, you have different things there. I don't know what they do. I don't know why do they have to be connected in a certain way. Where do I start? So let's start at the base. One of the most basic aspects that you have to have in mind before creating anything is that there are 3 basic steps to create any kind of nodes. So I'm simplifying this for you. The main concept basically is to have in your mind, like keep notes, that everything you're going to be creating from an object will determine its coordinate information. That's very logical, right? After that, you're going to use different procedural textures that Blender already has, and throughout all those operations, we're going to be doing mixing operations. All right, that's like adding, multiplying, dividing, subtracting, and at the end of the change process, it's going to be the shader compilation. Okay, so one difference that you need to understand from using images or hand-painted created images or pictures is that Blender is going to take its time to compute whatever thing you fed it to create that procedural shader that you're looking for. So there are shaders that will be light to calculate, and there are other shaders that will wait a lot in compounds, in groups. So just please take your time. Be patient when Blender is compiling. Do not touch anything when it's compiling, because otherwise you will break the application and it will probably corrupt your file. So it's a very good idea to keep on saving before huge changes, because sometimes changes could give you shader errors at compilation time. Okay, so again, coordinate information. This is picked up from the object or from a mapping coordinates. Then we're going to mix them. This is called a mix operation. This is used when you're adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, greater than, less than, and finally the shader compilation, which will calculate whatever shader you're purposing this to use. For example, a glossy shader, a diffuse shader, principled shader, etc. So these are the three basic blocks. Now let's talk about this one, the mix operation, because this is the most important step that you're going to do. Let's pretend for a second that this is our first procedural generated texture, and this is another node with another procedural texture. Since we already have this one created and this other one created as well, we can create our first operation, our first basic operation, which will be adding it. So if I take this and I put it over, it's going to occlude it. It will not let you see whatever thing is happening back there. And the idea with procedural shading is that you keep on adding different shapes and arranging those shapes in a 3D or 2D space. That way you can create complex patterns using basic form. In Blender, you have the mix shader and mix RGB. What is the difference between these two, Mr. Schiller? You will use mix shader when you're creating physical effects. All right, you want the glossiness from something you created being mixed directly with transparency, which is another physical effect. That's when you use mix shader. But for everything else, you will be using mix RGB. I hope the difference is very clear. I've been explaining this a lot through my stylized courses, and that's the difference. The mix shader will include this little factor slider. Factor here in Blender behaves like a mask. You know Photoshop, you will know that the mask will be created whenever you have black and white colors. You create your mask, black will occlude, white will show. So that's the way you use this, because if you have a node that will behave like a mask, I'm sorry, I'm writing with the mouse, so it's very difficult. It will be plugged here into the factor. This factor automatically will fill itself up to 100%, and it will not be available for you to do any other operation since it's being fed. Okay, so I cannot do that since it's being fed. Okay, so color 1, it's going to be our little first texture, which was a horizontal line. So that's going to be connected on color 1. And color 2, whatever we generated, it's going to be in this space right here. So as you can see, we can have a mask, we can have a horizontal texture, and then a vertical texture being mixed. So the way you do that is by using add. The first operation I want you to learn, it's add. What does add do? I'm using Photoshop so you can pick up the example, because I'm going to switch this from normal to screen. You also have screen, okay, but add specifically searches for the highlight value. Let's see if I can do this. pretty easy, right? Why are we doing this? Because as you can see, if I move my texture, you can see all the blacks have been removed. All the black color has been removed because I'm only picking up on light. Okay, that's why the screen mode is very useful. So that way you do not have to worry about these areas. You only worry about the area with the information. This is exactly 1 whenever you see white, and this is exactly 0 whenever you see black. And that is why we need to understand later on we cannot only use mix to RGB, like in this case, but we can also use directly math nodes. Okay, if you type math, you will see that we also have different informations to compute the values that we're giving Blender. And that's the important thing to understand here, because we're going to see some of those in action later on. So please understand, anything that is white, it's 1, anything that is black is 0, and anything that is gray, I don't have a gray information bar here, but let's just pretend this one is going to be the gray one. So whatever is in a gray value, it's 0.5. This is the math behind the entire network that you will see later on. That's why you will see that in some operations we multiply, then we divide, then we subtract, we do a lot of stuff. So that's the mix operation in a nutshell. Whatever you're going to create, you're going to be mixing it and adding it, dividing it, and subtracting it. So let's pretend, for example, that right now, since this is white, I'm going to multiply this and see the result. If I multiply, it will take in acquaintance all of the information that this had, all of the other information that it had from the black values, and the only true point that is giving positive result, in this case 1, it's the middle. Everything else has been cut or has been multiplied from its underlayer. And the third operation we're going to use, it's going to be subtract, which in our case it's going to be right here, subtract. When you subtract, and this is very important, let me just duplicate this so you can see the importance of this when you're creating NPR materials. This is very important. Subtract is very important. As you can see, I have two lines, two exact lines, two vertical lines in the same layer. Okay, the top layer and then the layer under. So if I take the top layer and I move it just a little bit to the left, I'm sorry, to the right, look what is going to be happening. If I go like this, and they are set to subtract again, look what happens. See? With this, I have created a line. Two of the same layers being used in a subtract mode or in a subtract math mode. Math, subtract, okay? It's going to give you the difference between them. So it is obvious that we need to do is to move, what we need to do is to move or modify its coordinates just a little bit so that the difference can be noticeable. Again, they are both the same vertical lines. They are the same, but since one is just a little bit displaced than the other, it creates a difference. Okay, so now you have the idea what these basic things do. Difference, of course, is going to find the difference between layer A and layer B. But Mr. Schiller, I do not understand why these different modes that you have in Photoshop work the same in Blender. Well, I want to let you know a little secret. When you create a node, you can come here into Edit, Preferences, Interface, and activate this, Python Tooltips, and also Tooltips. If you have that activated, whenever you create a math node, you can open here, and it will show you the math operation. For example, multiply add is layer A times layer B plus a new value C. Let's see what does subtract do. Subtract will take the color, or in this case black and white layer A, and subtract it from black and white layer B. But Mr. Schiller, you have not talked about the coordinate information. What is that for? The coordinate information are given by these guys, the geometry node, and obviously the textured coordinates. These two are going to give information about the object, and it will pass it through the texture, to the procedural texture, using a mapping node. This mapping node will feed what is the order of this entire procedural texture. There are special nodes which you can also add, which are called vector math. Vector math, exactly like we saw before, is able to mix directions from the textured coordinate or the geometry nodes. And hence, you can also mix using the mix RGB, because like we already mentioned before, it's going to look for operations like this. And also you can use the procedural coordinates that the mapping of the object will have. Okay? Another channel I seriously recommend you to watch is the Arindale channel. Okay? He's a Blender user as well, and he's very masterful and very skillful when creating stuff procedurally. You can see things apply here for a big object, but creating patterns, creating distortions, and basically his entire channel has some videos on how to work with things procedurally. I seriously recommend you to watch this specific video. You really need to see it in order for you to understand, like we were mentioning before, the coordinate information process, okay? Because he uses a lot of math nodes, a lot of mixing nodes before entering the actual coordinate, the local coordinates of the procedural texture. So it's very important what happens in this stage so that you can get a clear idea on how to transform locally and globally. In Substance Designer, they use a lot what they call the equalizer. The equalizer in Blender is equal to the color ramp, because we can move and adjust levels, if we can say it so. We can adjust the levels, so you can see right here, this one is acting already. We can adjust the levels of whatever we created using this. So this will be the levels and the equalizer that they use in Substance Designer. So let's continue. Alright, Mr. Schiller, my head is really hurting. Can we please get to the shader? Sure. Now that you know the basics, let's go and create the shader. I'm going to select this, go to the material. So let's address what we have here. Okay, I have my shader there. Okay, dented stylized eye shader. I'm going to be deleting this because we're going to create it brand new and new. Mr. Schiller, what are those numbers that you have right here? These numbers are specifically so that you can listen so that you can read actually what Blender is doing behind the scenes. If you have an NVIDIA card with CUDA cores, you're going to see them display and working there. So it is very important you do that. So let's create the material. This is going to be called, I don't know, IC. The first thing that you want to do is to obviously set yourself to look and dev. Now let's start with the basis that we mentioned before. We first need to recognize what kind of object is this in 3D space. And for that, we're going to need a generated coordinates in the world. The geometry node is going to feed us either position, the normals, the tangent, the true normals, incoming, which is basically how you see the scene in relation to the camera or the viewport. we're going to be using a Voronoi texture. Shift A, Voronoi texture. Okay. Now, if you click Ctrl and Shift and left click on the node, it's going to automatically connect it into the viewer. So the Voronoi texture has different parameters, and the ones that we're going to choose is to work in 2D. That means that the only coordinates that the Voronoi is going to react to are X and Y, not Z. F2, and also select Euclidean, if you have it right there. Now we're going to set the scale to 3.9 and then randomness to 1. So let's use our first math function, Shift A, and we're going to use clamp. Clamp is a math node, and if you connect it right there, it seems that nothing happened, but we're going to change the values from the minimum to register, that is 0.710, and the max is just 1. And what it's doing is that if we had level, please understand, if we were in Photoshop, what clamping is doing is taking this, if you have used Photoshop, you know what levels are, and it's doing this. See that color? See how the color is reacting? This is clamping. It's adjusting itself to this part of the graph for the range to be readjusted. So when we say 0.75 something, it's right here, 0.75. Look what it's doing, see? And then we have a minimum and a maximum. This is the minimum, this is the maximum. So that's what clamp is doing. This is the minimum and this is the maximum. See? It's happening the same exact thing. We can say that it's playing with the contrast in a sense. So clamp, it's almost like using the ramp shader, except that this one is going to work with a top and a low value. And now let's normalize, or let's equalize. I'm using the Substance Designer language right now because I want you to get the idea as clear as possible. Let's go for the color ramp. Let's equalize or normalize this. Inject that into factor and Ctrl Shift click. It will give you a cool idea of what we're doing. Since we're working with stylized shading, we're going to leave this here. We're going to change this to constant. We're going to add a second position for that. We're going to use some gray values like this one, and now we're going to click here, and we're also going to make it gray because we're going to work with ice. And sure enough, we can define the ice like such. You can move this and you can make this wider or shorter. In our case, I think I will leave this over here and switch this one over here. So what I want you to do is to select the Voronoi texture, the clamp, and the color ramp, and then press Shift P. With Shift P, you're going to get this frame. Next, you're going to press F9 without touching anything else. And this is a convenient way to rename this. So we're going to name this Chipped Dents. Alright? And you can also select the color that we want to use. But in our case, we just want to have it like this. Cool. If you want further properties, for example, like the size of this, you can press N, and then you're going to get here on the sidebar, you're going to come here into the item, and from there you can rename this and change the color, and also uncheck this shrink thing, which will allow you to make this size bigger or smaller without being like wrapped or shrinked to the nodes. This is very important so you can have the space to read your things. So let's put a name on this and size 35. Chipped dents. Please do not forget to name this here because this is the topmost level of data that Blender uses when reading into nodes when you're appending them to other scenes. So make sure this one is also called chipped dents. Okay, so this is top level scene data. This is object level data. Please, this is very important. So chipped dents. All right, very good. Congratulations, you have your first procedural layer ever. Give yourself a pat in the back. Let's go for the next one. Let's go Shift A, mapping. Now we're going to finally use the mapping as you would normally do. So what is this telling Blender? This is telling Blender, hey, whatever I want to create after this, through all of these networks of connections right here, whatever I want to do, I need to locate them locally. Whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to manipulate them locally. I'm going to change them locally. Whatever I do, their transforms, their rotations, their scales are going to be local for the coordinates only. And now let's use Shift A, Musgrave texture. And we're going to connect the direction or the vector into this. Now press Ctrl Shift and click the Musgrave texture. This is what we're going to see in the viewport. So remember, this is not reacting to any kind of lights at all. This is just pure procedural textures. So let's adjust the size of this to 887. We want a lot of details there. And 1. And for dimension and linearity, we are not going to be using those parameters, so just switch them to 0. 8.7. I'm sorry. Shift A, and now let's color ramp this. Please remember, this is the levels. If you need to adjust the contrast, this is the levels. This is the equalizer. This is the normalizer, whatever you want to call it. And now let's do this and bring this other one right here. You can also do this with clamp, but I'm showing you how to do this manually because we're going to do another nifty thing with the vectors, with the vector mats. So the idea here on this specific layer is to create the transversal scratches. We want to rotate that. So for that, we're going to use the rotate node, or the rotate vector, rotate, and that is going to tell Blender, hey, when you find the object, please transform it, rotating it, and locally apply these coordinates to these textures, which are going to be normalized, equalized, or contrasted using these levels. So here, what we're going to do is to use 31.8. And sure enough, you saw how that rotated. Look at that. Fantastic. Mr. Schiller, why don't you do it from here? Because here we have the different rotations for X, and you see that this is locally doing something, not globally. But Mr. Schiller, you could do that also from here. Yes, you can. But given this extra outer external transformation will allow you to double transformate your texture in here, and that's an advantage. Okay, that's why we're using this one. Let's group this thing. Select this one, and this one. Press Shift P, and now press F9. Let's change this. This layer is going to be called transversal scratches. Okay, transversal scratches, and you can move that, and it will behave as one single object, which is good. So the label size, as we already noticed, it's 35 for good reading, and just uncheck shrink because we want to be able to pull this down here so it will be readable. Now you can also color code this, but for now this is our first two procedural layers. Mr. Schiller, I'm starting to get this. It is all becoming clear. So the next thing that you're going to do, as you showed us in the Photoshop presentation, is that if we finish the coordinates information, which we already have, it's this one and this one, and then we are going to create the mix operation, which is basically mixing this layer and mixing this layer, right? Yes. Shift A, mix RGB, because we're working with colors. We're working procedurally. We're not working with physical shading and stuff. And from here, if you click here, you will notice that every letter in this node has an underlined letter. That is used to quick access the shortcut for the mixer node operation. So in our case, I'm going to be using add, and the letter it's underscore A underline. So even though this is a mix, if I click here and then I press A, I'm going to automatically get the add mixing node. But there is a faster way to do this. And then if you press Control Shift and drag this, you're going to see a green line automatically connecting those two nodes. Okay, and it's going to give you a mix node, which is good and it kind of works, but it doesn't know who is first and who is second, which is a problem. Additionally, this mix node is not what we intended to use, but add. So that's another way to mix directly, but what we want is to directly have the results to add. So select this one, and now press Ctrl Shift and equals, which should be right on the left side of your Enter key on your keyboard. So if you press that one, we're going to immediately get this add node, which is correct. It is a mixed node and has already connected this value and this value. How did he decide which order it was? Because we clicked on this one first and then we clicked on this one last. And the last is going to be on the base and the first is going to be at top. Okay? Here, the top most layer is this one down here. This is also explained on this Guilty Gear Stylized series. So from there on, we just click this and we can see that it has mixed very well. Mr. Schiller, this is amazing. I'm creating my first procedural layers. Yes, sir. I'm glad you're happy. Yes, gal or girl. I'm happy that you're creating this. You can now do, I don't know, Christmas style thing or icy stuff, but we're far from done. What we want to do now is to create a mask, because as you can see, these things do look like snow, but that's not our intent. Our intent is to scratch the previous white area and make it an irregular shape. For that, we need a mask. We're going to mask out what we don't need and leave in what we do need. And for that, we need to create a mask based on the chip dent area. We want all of this area to include the whites and all of this gray area to exclude whatever is out there. And the way we do that is by creating Shift A ramp, color ramp. We're going to equalize. Again, I'm using Substance Designer language here. We're going to color ramp, we're going to equalize, we're going to contrast this thing. So pull this one out, connect it here, Ctrl Shift, click on this one, left click, and now we see the same result that we had before. But what we need to do now is to adjust this so that we get a clear, sharp area. Why? So we can mask out whatever is not in the white area, but rather on the black area, will be left out, will not appear. And whatever is inside the white area is going to be drawn. And that is going to be our factor in the mix shader. You remember that factor gives you the ability to mix as a mask. So let's delete the node, because I was showing you how to get a quick node there. Shift A, let's use mix RGB. Let's connect layer 1 on the base, transversal scratches on the top. Let's favor the top layer and switch this to add. Shift click on this one. This is what we had before, but now we have created our mask. So select it, Shift P, F9. This is going to be mask. Fantastic. Now let's feed these from color to factor. And look what happens. I can see my white spots, but every white spots that falls outside the black area defined by my mask is being cut out. This is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly what we wanted in order for us to create this dented and irregular shape pattern. Because it's too dented, it's too perfect, we need to create some irregularities there, and that's the way we're going to do that. Fantastic. Let's go for the next one. Now that we have created that, let's add another color ramp. I told you my typing was not good today. Color ramp. Let's connect this one here. Shift click. Shift Control click. And now what we're going to do here is to further adjust our color because we want this to resemble ice, right? So let's do that. Fantastic. So now we're equalizing that. Why? Because if you remember, I'm going to select this and press M. This is to mute the node. That's like if you had deleted it, but instead it mutes it. So that means it doesn't participate in the operation. So if you press M again, it will toggle back. So as you can see, what the problem that we have here is that we have some rough differences between this color and this color, and we introduce the color ramp to equalize it to a better color. This will give you further control after all of this. Mr. Schiller, why did not you fix that from here? No, you always want to have external controls for that. Once you created your layer, you do not want to go back and switch it again because it becomes an endless loop. So once you have everything set up as you want it, tweak it outside the tree, like we're doing right now. Let's create another new layer and let's introduce the watery current that we're going to be using under so that we can get a semi-parallax effect so that when we rotate the camera, we're going to see the water run under. Okay, and for that effect, let's go down here. And first of all, do not forget to save. This is very important. And the next thing we're going to do is to introduce another new node, which is going to be the scale node, the vector scale node. And that vector scale node is available through a vector math. So select the position and feed it to the first value here, the first socket here, and now switch this to scale. Mr. Schiller, so what you're going to do is that you're going to take the geometry information and then you're going to change it from the topmost level, right? Yes, that's why we're using vector math set to scale. So that way, if I scale it to 1, scale it to 2, it's going to scale everything I do procedurally. And again, we're going to add a mapping. Connect that into the mapping node, and let's quickly rename this. Shift P, F9. This is going to be the pattern mapping so that you can understand this clearly. Again, select this one, Shift P, F9 immediately, and this is going to be called global scale of the pattern. Nice. And now let's create the watery layer itself. And the way we're going to do that is by using another Musgrave texture. Shift A, Musgrave texture. This Musgrave texture, you're going to set it up with 5.5, the details to 0.7, the dimension to 0, and linearity, we can say 2.8. Mr. Schiller, I do not see the result. Don't worry, press Ctrl Shift left click on this, and now you're going to see the result up here. Mr. Schiller, that does not look at all as water. You're right, it doesn't look like water, but let's make it look like one. Shift A and let's use ramp, color ramp, connected there. And also, let's change the colors because we want to do a kind of watery color there. White and this pale blue color. This one will do. Okay, Mr. Schiller, it still does not look good. Doesn't look like water at all. Now connect the pattern mapping into the vector. Okay. Okay, Mr. Schiller, now I'm seeing something, but this still does not look watery at all. Okay, that is because we need to change some of the pattern mapping stuff. What you really need to do in order for this to work is that this Musgrave texture, before receiving the pattern mapping or the local coordinates for this, it needs to be distorted. And this is very important because you can also distort procedural layers or procedural textures with other procedural nodes. For example, we're going to use a noise texture. Shift A, noise texture. Okay, you already know what noise does, right? If you connect this to factor, you're going to get black and white. If you connect this to color, you're going to get a colored version of noise. So let's work with factor, which is pure black and white. And now we're going to change the parameters here, 0.6, details to 10, and roughness to 0.5, it's okay. And we're going to use this noise pattern to distort the Musgrave texture. Look what happens if I connect factor to the Musgrave texture, and then I shift click here. We're getting this kind of patterns. Alright, Mr. Schiller, it now looks finally like an icy thing. Yeah, and there's more. If you connect the pattern mapping right now, this is going to be the local result. And from that local result, you now have the control to do your bidding. But if you do rotate, see that? It does not rotate because it's using the local coordinates of this pattern only, not the global coordinates that you can be using. And that's why we use this one. So if you use this to scale, then of course you're going to see this scale globally. But you can also do that from here. And like I mentioned before, this is important because we can distort locally and then distort globally. That's cool, but there's a nifty trick that you can use, and this one was shown to me by Arindale. Shift A, use Mix RGB, and what we want to do is to combine the local distortion versus the global position, and we're going to do that using the Mix node. Okay, so I'm going to connect this one to the vector. I'm going to use the factor as, I'm going to be using the color as color 2. And now I'm going to be using color 1 from the pattern mapping. I'm going to connect this one over here. And then I'm going to cut this one because we don't need it right now. We're going to create another thing. And here in factor, I'm going to type 0.467. We're back to square one, Mr. Schiller. This is not looking good. Okay, just hold down a little bit because I'm going to be explaining why we are doing this. And the reason is we're going to take this position from the geometry and we're going to be offsetting it from the camera. And for that, we need to create the basic parallax effect. Before we forget, please click on these nodes, Shift P, we're going to call this F9, watery current. Alright, we have another procedural layer there. So the way you do basic parallax is by using the object information with a texture coordinate. So let's do that. Shift A, texture coordinate, and now we're going to introduce again vector math, because we're going to be using subtract. What we want to do is to be able to subtract this direction that I'm seeing from the viewport versus the local coordinates that this texture have. It's basically an offset for the camera. And now I'm going to take the incoming ray from the geometry, which is right here, incoming. I'm going to be taking this and then I'm going to be subtracting it to the generated, to the object coordinates itself. Subtracting this one right there, and now let's take the incoming, you can see it there, incoming, and connecting it here. Mr. Schiller, what do I do if I'm very far, if my tree is like gigantic and I need to take this node and connect it to somewhere else across the entire globe? It's very easy. There's a shortcut in Node Wrangler, which is Shift and Alt. And if you click this one and then you Shift and Alt and right mouse button, drag it onto the one that you want to connect it, and then two questions are going to be popping out of this dialog. First question is to magnify node number 1, and thus it's going to ask you, where do you want to connect this from? I want to connect this from the incoming. You remember that, right? From the incoming. Now a second window pops up so that you can have a clear readable area. Where are you going to connect this one to? vector, vector 1, vector 2, or vector 3? Well, since we already know that vector 1 is occupied, let's go for vector 2. And sure enough, it connects it there. So that way you can do this. Please, if you create this kind of nodes, please take your time. It's really easy. So we're going to create the basic parallax effect because right now we're moving. Yes, I can see something that is moving, Mr. Schiller. It's kind of good, but it's not watery enough. What's going on? So we need to set the offset coordinates. And for that, we're going to again grab vector math, shift D, and what I'm going to do now is to change from subtract to scale. If you can see it down here, select vector math scale. Please notice the difference between vector math, shift A, and math. Regular math has a different input socket color, which is gray, and this one has a purple socket color. Okay, so that's the difference. So this incoming information from the geometry is going to be offsetted, and the way I want to do that is by inserting the vector map to scale. I'm going to scale it to -1. I'm going to shift D again, and then I'm going to select this to be reached here in the scale, and now I'm going to be using another value. I'm going to use 4.8. Oh wow, Mr. Schiller, it returned like normal regular water. Yes, it did. And now guess what? If you move the camera, that water is moving. This is the basic parallax effect that you can get. Sanctus offered me his help about creating the basic parallax effect, so like I mentioned before, do not forget to visit his channel, show some support, and he helped me out with this part. So here in the geometry, you're going to take the incoming, of course, you're going to scale it, and then you're going to subtract it. That way we're offsetting the coordinates from the incoming ray versus the object local data, and that's why we're getting this effect. So if you want this more pronounced effect, more enhanced effect, you can continue to offset this, and then you will get more offset, alright? But this is the one that works. Alright, so our work there is done, so let's select all of this. You can press B to box select, just grab all that, and now shift P, and now F9, and please name this basic 2D parallax. Mr. Schiller, but out here, while I'm zoomed out, I cannot read what it says. Don't worry, click on this, press N, and then change the level size to 35, uncheck shrink, do the same thing over here, level size 35, uncheck shrink, Control S to save, press N. Let's move on into the next compositing layer. Mr. Schiller, I already know what the watery current looks like, but what happened with my other chipped layers? Well, if you remember, you have them right here. They are unplugged right now, and the way we're going to use this is by combining them using a mix RGB node. Mix RGB. Remember, we are calculating not physicality of the light, we're calculating color. And the way we're going to mix this is by selecting the add operation in this mix RGB color. I'm going to come here, I'm going to select add, or just press the letter A, automatically it will show us this. So my base layer will be our chipped layers, and my top layer, please remember color 2 is the top layer, is going to be the watery current. Again, Shift Alt, right mouse click, drag it over here, let go of all three. I'm outputting from color, and then I'm inputting into color 2. Shift Alt, I'm going to click this, Shift Alt, and then right mouse button, drag it over here. I'm going to go from color to value number 2. Okay, it's connected there, value number 2. And now I'm going to connect this color to this one, and then Control Shift click, left click in here. Okay, so we have our current, watery current there, but then I see that the chips have gone away. What happened? What do I do to fix this? And to fix that, we need to adjust over here with a mid value. So I'm going to select this guy, press this one plus, and now I'm going to really adjust this over here and this one over here. And I'm also going to add a secondary value by selecting this one and moving this one over here. And this is the transversal scratches, which we also can manipulate with the size 3.6. Now I want you to see what happened here. Remember, before we had this, right? But since this is procedural, you can change it locally using the mapping node, and we can stretch it out to 3.6. You can even stretch it out more if you want, okay, like such. Remember, we did rotate this. That's why it's called transversal scratches. Perfect. So let's go again and click on this last node. Control Shift left click on that one. And sure enough, we're getting the transversal scratches. Awesome. This will just get you started on what you need to do to get procedural layers. So the last step is to add some impact. I'm going to break the eyes with a node I previously created and that I have grouped into another scene. And the way I'm going to import it is by File, Append. I'm going to navigate to my Blender file, locate the one that I'm interested in, and I'm going to be presented with these folders, which is the blend file itself, because like I mentioned before, this is why it is important to name everything you do inside your scene at scene level and at object level. I have shown this throughout my entire channel. My entire videos relate to this because not many people know that Blender is not just a file, a closed file where you cannot see whatever thing is inside there. Blender, once you access a blended file, you have access to different levels of data. And the data that we're interested in, it's the material folder. And then we have this cracked ice. We have this cracked ice compound group. We can append it. And we can also come out here, node 3. Okay? I grouped it locally. I grouped it like you're seeing there. And I have this broken ice. And then I append that. And now I'm going to Shift A. I'm going to come here into group. And then I'm going to search for broken ice, just like we mentioned before. What is broken ice? I'm going to select it. I'm going to press Tab. I'm going to go into this and look at this entire network of operations. Math operation, the mass scaling, dividing, subtracting, everything you can see there. You can explore in your own time once I release the shaders. And this group is very useful. What does it do? I'm going to press Control Tab, which closes all of the groups and goes out to the topmost level of the shader tree. So broken ice, in a nutshell, I'm going to Control Shift click, left click on it. It's going to give you the parameters to create a procedural crack shader. Look at that. Okay, we cannot see very much because it's connected directly into the material output, but I'm going to Shift A and then I'm going to ramp, color ramp, select it there, and now we can manipulate the contrast. And as you can see there, it's a shader that breaks or gives the illusion that it's shattered. But the advantage is that it is procedural. So you can break or rather multiply this value against this other value. Let's see how it works. Shift A, mix, RGB, we're going to combine colors. This is going to be the topmost layer, and this is going to be the base layer. I'm going to favor it all the way to the first topmost, and now I'm going to switch this to multiply. And please, and this is where it becomes clear why we are using these numbers that you've seen here. The way you get these numbers is to evaluate what EEVEE is doing. So if you press F3, you're going to get to the search function, right? Now you're going to type debug, press enter, and I want you to type this number, 22. This is going to give you the stats for the shader compilation using your NVIDIA card. And as you can see, it takes 10 seconds to calculate this entire tree and then display the shader right here. Alright, Mr. Schiller, this is looking amazing. So if you move this, I get the parallax, and I also get the surface of the scratch of the crash here of the shadow eyes on top. Indeed you do. And you can come here into the broken eyes. This is a node group that I created for you. I will be releasing this later with the node group pack of stylized eyes. So let's open this some more and read some of the values. So this is the scale impact. Now let's change it some so you can see how much impact is doing. So right there you can enlarge it, you can make it small. Okay, so this is good. I like it like such. And now this is the scale impact mask. No, this is the important part. You can animate your cracking eyes from this parameter. Look at that. If you click it and animate it on time, it looks like it's breaking. And if you add a cracking sound, this will totally convey the audience that you're cracking these eyes. It looks amazing. Even if a character hits the floor and impacts the eyes, it's going to break. Look at that. Cool. So let's continue to explore some other things. This is the scale impact crack details. So the internal details that you see here, you can change them or even contrast them so that you can also get more, we can say, dramatic effect for the crack. Look at that. Fantastic. This is the scale small rocks. So the small rocks that are inside the pattern can be also scaled. Look at that. Cool. Now, this can randomize the mask size. See? You can variate the mask for the cracks. Cool. And finally, you can randomize the mask center because this is covered, or rather masked out, with a circular mask layer. So in that way you can create more or less details in the inner areas or the outer areas. And also you can move this here so you can manipulate what you want to see. And since we combine this with multiply, I'm only grabbing the black information for this. And sure enough, you have your cracks there. They will react to light. So you can see here, I'm going to grab this and then I'm going to move them. Oh wow, yes, this is it. This is it. This is exactly it, Mr. Schiller. This is a procedural shader, a procedural crack shader working for my bidding. I can scale the impact. I can scale the mask impact. Of course, I can break this all. I can also randomize the size of it. This is just amazing. I can play with this all day long. Yeah. Okay, so there you have it. Your physical shader breaking the surface of this. And now to finalize this, we're going to use the multiply, or I'm sorry, we're going to use the darken method for mixing our cracks versus the previous layer. So I'm going to grab this over here, and now the factor is going to allow me to control how dark or how light I want this to be. So in our case, we're going to use 0.697, and we want to invert the direction of the cracks. So click here, and sure enough, we have our icy cracked shader right there. Mr. Schiller, are you going to use colors? Sure enough, you can. Shift A, and let's use curves, RGB curves. Mr. Schiller, but this is a grayscale image. How do you intend to colorize this? Well, if you already have seen all the other Photoshop videos where I mentioned this, we need to start with grayscale values in order for us to tint them correctly. So I'm going to go into the blue channel right here, and then I'm going to, I want to explain what is this and how it works. This is basic contrast, and this is basic levels. So however you manage to use this, you can just click right here, and we want to upraise the blue levels to get more contrast on the blue channel, and we get this. And now I want to lower it on the contrast before the curve ends. So I want to do that. Just a slight slope. That is looking good. That's a blue channel. Now let's introduce some green tinting. Why? Because I want to go to cyan or indigo. And for that, I'm going to lower this one over here. Okay? So again, remember, whatever you do onto this side is contrast. Whatever you do onto this side is levels. Okay, that looks just about right. Now let's introduce some mid color there. Why do I want to do that? Because the mid color was the grayscale part of this. Remember, we had pure black, pure white, and grayscale, which is this. That's why we're doing this on the middle section, to tint and also affect all of those points. So I'm going to leave them here and such over here. You can also have the influence of this. If you don't want that all that much tint, you can factor it down, you can factor it up. And finally, let's go into the red channel. And for the red channel, I do want to have some more contrast to get a violet over this side. And less on the base. Okay, that's kind of looking good. Yep. So there you have it. That's your basic 2D ice shader with the procedural cracks that I'm going to be releasing later on when this is completed and finished. But look at that. Let's imagine someone is stepping on that. And the best thing of all is that you can come here into the world, change the world color to pure blackness, and your material will not be affected. Not only that, you can also switch your camera, and then you're going to also have that nifty parallax effect down there. You can, of course, go back to your wavy current, watery current layer and continue to tweak it. Now you know where it is. Now you know what it is. Now you know how to organize your layers. Now you know how to mix them. Now you know what you can do to mask them. Now you know how to colorize them. Please do also colorize at the end of the entire process. That is the best advice I can give you. Do not colorize it inside the process. Otherwise, you will get a very difficult time trying to arrange all of the colors. Alright, thank you very much. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you have liked this. And please do not forget to subscribe. Hit the bell notification button in the channel. And do not forget that whenever you click on all of those things, you're doing a favor to yourself, because the YouTube algorithm is going to detect that you like this content and will serve you more. This has been Pierre Schiller with another breakdown video training for procedural layer materials. The Blender community's got your back if you get questions. Everyone is invited to participate in the comment section down below. Try Blender. Blender is powerful and beyond industry compatible. See you in the next video.